Thank you very much, Father George, again, and welcome back to our final full session on place. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a curate in the Church of England, non-stipendiary minister, or self-supporting minister, as we're called these days, out in East Oxford, and I love Cowley. I love the place where we live, and that, I think, is the experience of many Anglicans, that they have a deep, enduring attachment to the place where they are. And that's been around the conversations that we've had throughout the day. Bishop Eleanor was pointing us to this theme earlier when she was talking about people and place and that sense of covenantal attachment. And of course, it's been in the other two sessions as well. And as we come to this final session, delighted to have three speakers who will be addressing this theme of place, its significance in this wider set of questions around the legitimacy of the public role and place of the Church of England. To begin with, we'll be hearing from Right Reverend Dr. Andrew Rumsey, who's Suffragan Bishop of Ramsbury in the Diocese of Salisbury. And he'll be followed by Dr. Maria Power, Senior Research Fellow at the Las Casas Institute for Social Justice at Blackfriars Hall here in Oxford. And finally, from the Right Reverend James Newcombe, who's retired Bishop of Carlisle and former member of the House of Bishops in the House of Lords. And there'll be some time for conversation and Q&A as we get towards the close of this session. Straight away at the end of this conversation, we'll move into the concluding remarks. And we have a couple of contributors there who will help to round out our conversations, and we'll introduce them as we get to that point. But can I just begin by inviting us to welcome Right Reverend Dr. Andrew Rumsey.
Thank you, Josh. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be with you. We have many more things to say to you. Can you bear it? What a fascinating day. It's been so sparky and interesting and thought-provoking. Paying tribute to the legendary East End priest, Kenneth Leach, Simon Jenkins, who's been mentioned already this afternoon, once wrote in the Evening Standard how Anglican priests appear to be wedded to sheer geography. The doctors and the lawyers and the teachers, he wrote, commute here from more salubrious parts, but the priests stay. They seem wedded to sheer geography. This was written about a generation ago, and it made a profound impact upon me when I read it, particularly as I was beginning to question why, given that we were preparing, as I was at the time, for an explicitly local ministry, we received a certain amount of ecclesiastical history in preparation, formation for ordination, but little or no ecclesiastical geography, and how the consideration of geographical matters really was neglected, it seemed to me. And I thereafter made it my particular passion and study to home in on what is the theology of place underlying the nature of the Church of England. I felt that this attachment to locality at the human scale, to neighbourhood, was the logic not only of the English Church but also of Christology. Both began there. And so in my book, Parish, An Anglican Theology of Place, I began to explore the idea that a nation, or a world for that matter, is what you end up with, not begin with. This appeared to be the priority not only of physics and of organic growth, but also of Christian theology, as I say. In Jesus Christ, it is believed, God takes place. That means that Christians tend to answer universal questions in a very particular way, starting at Nazareth or Eden and working outwards, inferring cosmic truths from local ones. The culture of the kingdom, Jesus taught, springs and grows from something small, yeast or a seed, with potential for unlimited increase. Now, the Church of England operates at multiple scales of locality, but it was the parochial that seemed to me the most theologically rich and socially consequential for the vast majority of the population over an astoundingly long period. And the more I delved into this idea of history, its background in our society and thought and social imaginary, it appeared to be a fractal of England itself. And the balance between those two, I think, is held within the Church's established status. This tenacious attachment to territory can be puzzling. It is certainly a privilege. It is fundamental to the establishment, as I say. Clergy, Anglicans don't often make it explicit, but a curious mix of soul, soil, and society underlies much of what we are about. The Church of England retains a peculiar and inherited responsibility for neighbourhood that, for various political and historical reasons, doesn't pertain for any other denomination or faith group in quite the same way. This is, of course, both a weakness and a strength, an offence to some, a blessing to others. And I want to offer a few reflections on how that came to be, as I understand it, before considering whether it should continue in the same form or another. The idea of what Bagehot in the English Constitution calls local holiness, fascinating phrase he uses to describe, when he's talking about the monarchy actually, as the monarch as the defender of the faith, he uses this phrase local holiness. That at the heart of the Constitution can trace its roots back to the mystical geography that shaped the formation of national culture when, as Adrian Hastings put it, in the construction of nationhood, England was imagined through intensely biblical glasses. King Alfred and the Venerable Bede dreamed up Albion's story from a theological bed, however nightmarish that might now seem to some. The English Church didn't obtain or retain its local attachment by accident, but because of what it offered the nation at successive points in its emergent self-understanding, whether as the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms coalesced into Engleland, as it was first called, or at the Reformation, or in the 1940s at the formation of the welfare state. Three things I want to suggest in particular. It offered a meaningful national story, political usefulness, and a highly resilient kind of local cohesion through the formation of the parish system. And an evolving sense of establishment might usefully consider how each of those three pertain now, what they might mean now. Anglicanism's inherited sense of local responsibility, still enshrined in the cure of souls of every parish priest, was both empowered and compromised by association with secular and landed power. Think God is love emblazoned over Oliver Twist's workhouse, or the siding of the clergy with the landed classes as they invariably did at the enclosures of common land. Nevertheless, the vision of each parish, as in the poet Robert Southey's words, a little commonwealth, has proved staggeringly adaptive and resilient, even surviving. This is interesting to me, what was described by one as the local disestablishment of the Church of England, the Local Government Act of 1894. That was the pivotal piece of legislation where the civil parish and the ecclesiastical parish parted company. In the safe in the vestry of my former parish church in St Mary Oxford in the Parish Hills, in the Surrey Hills, is a leather-bound minute book of annual parochial church meetings. And up until the 1890s, it deals with all kinds of things like the drainage in local fields and the appointment of local constables. And thereafter, the business becomes much more obviously churchy, so to speak. This measure, in some respects, ended nearly 500 years of the Church of England's responsibility for local government that continued on in various ways pretty much into living memory. My late mother can remember the last workhouses closing in the early 1930s. And whilst the 1894 Act effectively secularised responsibility for local welfare, it also democratised the Church's contribution and acknowledged the huge 19th century expansion of social service from nonconformist congregations, which made the old Anglican hegemony unworkable, especially in the new cities. Nevertheless, the retention of church-state links into the 20th century gave political heft to a deeply Christian conception of social order, which via Archbishop William Temple and others contributed directly, as we know, to the formation of the welfare state. The intriguing thing, of course, is that whilst our congregational membership has long been shrinking like a balloon, this slow puncture has not, by contrast, shrunk the Church of England's own view of its social reach and responsibility. National allegiance to the Church may be in heavy and long-term decline, but the Church's allegiance to the nation remains as lofty as ever. Explains perhaps why 51% of children in my diocese attend an Anglican primary school when only 1.7% attend its public worship. But does this deep and privileged connection with place hold back the wider Christian community or indeed wider society now? Is its inherited responsibility for the soul of place, this place, anything more than a nostalgic fantasy in multi-belief Britain? My answer would be no, so long as it continues to evolve. And like the parish system, of course, the only reason we have it all these centuries later is that it has been remarkably adaptive and flexible, and it has grown and changed as our communities, as our nation has changed. It is an evolving tradition. It has not just been one thing at each point in our history. At its best, I suggest, it is good for both faith and society, being a bulwark against increasing religious sectarianism and a sign that the nation, the state or society is no mere pragmatic or political or existential contract, but it's also a sacred and a transcendent thing, with a meaningful narrative leading us to a better place. I suggest that it continues to perform this function both locally and nationally at key points in our story at both scales. But just to conclude, I think there are three other ways in which Anglican local attachment can make a distinctively Christian contribution to the life of the nation, which will become increasingly vital in the years ahead. Firstly, and I'm particularly homing in on the idea of the parish as an evolving model of community. So firstly, as a model for inclusive community, our society urgently needs ways of living locally that can be resilient without being defensive, little without being narrow, bounded enough to give identity and belonging, but also open, diverse, mutable. These two aren't mutually exclusive. And the clue is found, I think, in the origins of the word parish in Greco-Roman civil society. The word paroikia, as you may know, described the community of people either living physically beside the city boundaries, literally those beyond the household, or as non-citizens within the walls, those who lived nearby but didn't quite belong. It's ironic that parochial came to epitomize petty self-containment when its original meaning indicates the opposite and is far closer to our contemporary definitions of stranger and refugee. In fact, that's how it's translated when it appears in the New Testament. The parish is, I suggest, the original community for non-belongers, and it would be radical indeed to consider how this model could grow a new political consensus at the local level, something I trust will be explored in numerous church halls across the country in hustings over the coming weeks. Secondly, and linked to this, by offering a genuine mixed ecology, by which I don't just mean a shorthand for traditional and modern forms of church congregation, but the interconnection of all living things. The environmental crisis demands of us resilient ways of local life that can return the connection between people and place, soul, soil, and society. The rejuvenation of parish as an environmental concept in the last 30 years by environmental writers like Richard Mabey counteracts the dislocating tendencies of global capital. It urges instead the slow growth of neighbourhood and more localised models of commerce, food production and energy. The word culture itself, as you will know, grows from two roots, the ploughshare and sacred worship, cultus and culta, are there both held in that word culture, and the local church is well positioned in its different forms to explore their reunion in our time. Thirdly, and finally, in the gift of Anglican local attachment to the nation is the recovery of a local heaven. Malcolm mentioned a bit about this earlier on. No society can last long without a vision of the future, and Christian eschatology has been a far more influential feature of our history than we usually admit, not least in the construction of industrial cities in the 19th century. Christian tradition is rightly in two minds about belonging, wary of belonging too much when our true home is in heaven, but praying daily for that kingdom to come on earth as in heaven. This tension is an enormous strength, for it insists on the church being a kind of a rehearsal space for a better place. This is the necessary antidote for our possession of the land, which is the right corrective for a national church which has been far too landed at different points in its past, far too possessive of its territory. You may know of the American social anthropologist called Irving Goffman. Goffman wrote a series of popular studies in the 1970s that consider how community can be reformed at what he calls times of crisis and festival. Seen, for example, in the remarkable outbreak of cordial conversation with strangers that often accompanies extreme weather in England. We also saw it in the pandemic. Different place, different rules. Reading Goffman, it struck me that Anglican ecclesiology at the local level retains this kind of permission within community to act as if these conditions of crisis and festival always pertain, as in one sense they do pastorally. Parish priests are hailed and approached by complete strangers. They're almost expected to act in an extraordinary way, as if they had one foot in another place entirely. This is not exclusive to the Church of England, of course. All denominations do this in different ways, and through effective citizen participation and interfaith action, churches are modelling this vision for neighbourhood that lies at the heart of the established church. Would that pursuit of the common good be better served by disestablishment? My fear is that taking that step would further erode and effectively exile to the private sphere the public legitimacy of the Christian narrative that remains, however vulnerably, at the centre of government. And this legacy still provides a wonderful opportunity and mandate for all local churches to act, as it were, as if it was always snowing, as if we were neighbours and could act and speak, relate to one another differently, to rehearse the script of the place to come as if we were already there. Thank you.